Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick look at a new mini PC called the M1 from OneXPlayer. We'll do some performance tests on its own as well as connected to the OneXGPU. Doing a quick physical overview of the M1, it looks very similar to the OneXGPU. It uses the same shell with a couple of modifications. On the front, we have our power button and fingerprint reader. We have a button to open up the OneX console software, as well as another button that you can press to cycle through the different RGB effects. We also have our Oculink port and HDMI at the front. If we take a look at the back of the device, we have our I/O mostly over here. We have two USB-C ports all the way on the left here. We have an HDMI and a display port as well. We have two USB-A ports, a micro SD slot, as well as Ethernet and a headphone jack. At the back of the device is where we have our exhaust vent, and at the bottom we have an easy access SSD slot. You can change out your SSD fairly quickly. This would be good if you're switching between different OSs that you have on different SSDs. And the cover is secured by magnets, so you can easily remove it. For the specs of the M1, what we have is an Intel Core Ultra 9 185H. We have 32 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM at 5600 megatransfers per second. We have a TDP of 45 watts and a turbo boost up to 60 watts. We have Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2. And for the eGPU, I'll keep it brief. We have the AMD 7600M XT graphics card. And our TDP can go up to 120 watts when it's boosted. We'll jump into some game tests. All tests are run at 1080p unless otherwise mentioned. For Black Ops 6, we have about 75 FPS on the iGPU and close to 400 on the eGPU, so a significant bump. And if we take the settings to max on the eGPU, we're getting about 160 FPS. In God of War, we're at about 60 FPS on the iGPU and about 150 on the eGPU with the same settings. Now if we max out the settings and turn off FSR, we can get about between 60 to 70 FPS on the eGPU. For Baldur's Gate 3, we have about 30 to 35 FPS on the iGPU with the FSR turned up high and the settings on low, and on the eGPU we have about 50 to 60 FPS with FSR turned off and the settings set to ultra. For Cyberpunk, we have about 40 FPS on low settings, and we have anywhere from 75 to 100 FPS on the eGPU with the same settings. And interestingly enough, if we crank up the settings to ray tracing low on the eGPU, we sit at about 65 to 75 FPS. Now for Final Fantasy VII Remake, we have 1080p on the left and 4K on the right. The iGPU is getting about 40 FPS, just under, and we're getting close to 60 FPS at 4K on the eGPU. My capture card was forcing it to limit at 60 FPS, so I can't really get an accurate picture of how far up it could actually push. For Horizon Forbidden West, we have about 30-35 FPS on the iGPU with the settings turned all the way down and FSR cranked up. And on the right side, we have the eGPU going anywhere from 70 to 90 FPS, and the settings are maxed out. This is one of those games, kind of like Call of Duty, that had a pretty massive difference. On to Forza Horizon 5 on medium settings, we're getting about 40 to 50 FPS on the iGPU, and we're getting anywhere from 120 to just under 170 FPS on the eGPU. So if you're playing on the eGPU, I'd recommend bumping up the settings. I did record at extreme settings, but that clip seemed to have bugged out, so I can't show you that. For Helldivers 2, we have about 40 to 50 FPS on the iGPU, and we're getting about 150 FPS on the eGPU. So if you're on the eGPU, definitely bump up the settings. If I set it to max settings, you end up getting about 90 FPS, so about double the FPS, and this is with maxed out settings. For Red Dead Redemption 2, we have about 45 to 50 FPS on the iGPU, and that's with the graphics slider all the way down to the lowest. And over on the eGPU, if we slide the graphics setting all the way to the max, we're getting about 150 FPS. This is another example of where the eGPU is just dominating the iGPU. We're getting about triple the performance, and we've gone from the slider all the way to the left for the lowest performance to all the way to the right, which should be the highest performance. Of course, you can tweak the settings beyond that, but I just went with the slider. For Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the graphics are set to the lowest preset, and we're getting about 50 to 60 FPS on the iGPU, and somewhere between 200 to 250 on the eGPU with the same settings. Once we set to the highest graphics preset on the eGPU, we get about 110 FPS. Moving over to Starfield at the lowest setting, we get about 40 FPS on the iGPU and about 170 on the eGPU. And switching things over to max settings, we're getting about 70 FPS on the eGPU, so if you're okay with a 60 FPS target, this is probably the best setting. So as you can see from all these tests, the iGPU is getting anywhere from 25 to 50% of the performance of the eGPU. So if you end up pairing up the M1 with a 1XGPU or another eGPU, you're going to get really good game performance. If you, however, go with the M1, the game performance is going to be not quite as good as the AMD variants like the Ryzen 7 8840, but you should be able to get a decent enough performance to play most of your games with a 40 FPS or a 30 FPS target. So that's the OneXPlayer M1. My biggest takeaway is that the CPU is actually pretty powerful. It works great when you pair it up with the 1XGPU. The iGPU really is the same that we've seen in the 155H and the 135H, so I was going in expecting that it was not going to quite keep up with the AMD chips, but was pleasantly surprised with its performance when connected to an eGPU. If you're looking to purchase one of these, you can pick this up at the OneXPlayer store. I'll leave a link in the description. And a special thank you to OneXPlayer who sent me this loaner device to test out for everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick testing video, and thank you for watching.